I slowly regained consciousness. The feeling of damp moss cradling my back and the distinct aroma of earthy herbs filled my nostrils. The dimly lit confines of a cave became visible, its walls glistening with condensation. Every inch of my body throbbed, the aftermath of the recent combat evident. Soft, melodic humming echoed gently, a soothing counter to my pained state. As my vision cleared, a werewolf in her human form came into focus. I immediately recognized her eyes as the first one whose pelt I investigated previously. She was delicately applying a paste of crushed herbs onto my wounds, her touch gentle yet firm. She then wrapped the treated injuries with bandages that smelled of sage. Harkin's silhouette appeared at the cave's entrance, the ambient light casting him in a soft glow. Concern weighed heavy on his face, though his stance was strong and protective. "Alistair," his voice was soft yet firm. "We found you in our territory, the scent of a Winterpelt wolf lingering around you." The accusation in his voice clear. Mustering the strength to respond, I met Harkin's eyes. "Harkin, it wasn't what it seemed." He raised a hand, cutting me off. "I know you wouldn't provoke them. They dared to harm you in Timberfang land, and they will pay for this affront," he vowed, his voice filled with a fierce determination. "It's more complicated, Harkin," I whispered, trying to convey the urgency. "It wasn't a Winterpelt, but a vampire." Harkin's eyes widened in surprise, processing the gravity of my words. "A vampire?" he mused. "Their treachery runs deeper than I imagined." Harkin's eyebrows furrowed in thought, a deep growl escaping his throat. "Those Winterpelts, to bring in such a creature to tip the balance of power. No wonder they have grown so audacious in recent months." I shook my head, trying to make him understand. "Harkin, this is not their doing. This vampire is an old adversary of mine, dating back far too long. They are here, not for the Winterpelt's cause, but their own malicious purposes. That is, to spread chaos and disrupt the fragile balance of power between your clans, and take over your lands. I've faced them before and know the depths of their cunning and ruthlessness. It dons wolf fur to better hide its presence." Harkin took a moment to digest this, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on his thigh. "This would explain the elusive wolf scent we've been detecting. We've spent weeks trying to track down its source, and it always seemed to vanish into thin air. This creature, it's like no other." I nodded, my voice somber. "And it's the same monster that took Hildy from us. It didn't just want to kill, it sought to ignite the flames of war amongst the clans. And if we're not careful, it will get what it wants." Harkin's eyes narrowed, a mixture of pain and determination evident in his gaze. "If what you say is true, then we've been blind to the real threat, chasing shadows while the true enemy sowed discord right under our noses. I wish I realized it sooner," I admitted. "But now that we know, we can't let it continue. We need a plan, Harkin." Harkin nodded. I trust you, Alistair. My clan and I will stand with you." As he spoke, he reached behind him and produced a sword. It was plain, lacking the ornate detailing and superior craftsmanship of my usual weapon, but it held a certain ruggedness. "Take this," Harkin said, offering the sword to me. "It's not as refined as what you're accustomed to, but in a tight spot, it might just save your life until you can retrieve yours." I grasped the hilt, feeling its weight and balance. "Thank you, Harkin," I reply, nodding in gratitude. As Harkin and I were in conversation, formulating a plan to mitigate the damage and hopefully bring peace, our words were abruptly cut short. The sudden, chilling howls reverberated through the dense forest, paralyzing us mid-sentence. The guttural roar of impending war resounded with such intensity. It felt as though the very earth was trembling beneath our feet. We locked eyes, sharing a moment of understanding. We were both familiar with Einar's anguish over the loss of his daughter, but these howls bore the weight of a myriad of pent-up emotions. They were a symphony of mistrust, anger, pain, and frustration, accumulated over many moons, now demanding to be heard and acknowledged. The silence that followed our halted conversation was thick with tension, each of us processing the reality that time was rapidly running out. Harkin's eyes were wide with alarm. "Seems we've run out of time," I remark with a grim smile, attempting to inject a bit of levity into the dire situation. Harkin looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of worry and determination. "Alistair," he began, his voice strained, "you've done more than enough. You can leave, you know. This isn't your war." I met his gaze, unwavering. "It became my war the moment I helped create peace between the clans years ago. I won't run now, especially not when I may be the only one who can bridge the divide. I'm here until the end. Harkin, whatever that may be." Exiting the cave, the scene was intense. Members of the Timberfang clan were assembled, all morphed into their wolf forms, teeth bared, hackles raised. The very air seemed to be charged with an electric tension. I stepped forward, raising my hand for silence. "Let me go to Einar," I asserted. "I'll try to make him understand. We have a better chance if I can appeal to him directly." Harkin, after a brief hesitation, nodded. "Very well, but we're not far behind. If anything happens, we'll be there." With a nod of gratitude, I began my trek toward the agonizing howls, the weight of the clan's future pressing heavily on my shoulders. I moved with determination, hoping to reach Einar before the full fury of war was unleashed. The dense forest thinned as I approached the clearing. The chill of the impending battle made the very air seem to constrict around me. I strained my eyes, searching the dusky sky and trees for the familiar silhouette of a sinister bat, but found nothing. As I entered the clearing, a sea of hostile gazes met mine. Winterpelt wolves, their numbers now bolstered by younger, eager faces I hadn't previously encountered, stood poised for battle. There was a palpable tension among them, a mix of anger and anticipation. At the center stood Einar, his massive form reverting back to that of a man. He held my sword, its blade gleaming menacingly under the dim forest light, the weapon looking out of place in Einar's grasp, his stance completely wrong for wielding such a weapon, but the message was clear: he was ready for battle. "Einar," I began, voice calm but assertive, "this doesn't need to go this way." Einar's blue eyes, usually so full of wisdom and calm, now burned with a fiery rage. He raised a hand, signaling me to stop. "Alistair," he responded, his voice dripping with disdain, "step aside. This is not your war." I gripped the hilt of the crude blade Harkin had given me, feeling its rough, unbalanced weight. "It became my fight when your clan entered this land, ignoring the treaty," I countered, my voice firm. "I won't stand aside and watch these clans destroy each other. Let's settle this, just you and me." Einar's expression turned from one of anger to something darker. "You challenge me," he hissed, disbelief evident in his tone. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "One-on-one, man versus man, sword versus sword. If I win, you stand down and we find another way. If you win," I pause, taking a deep breath, "you'll have no further interference from me." Einar stared at me for what felt like an eternity, the weight of our shared history pressing down on the moment. Then, with a dark chuckle, he nodded. "Very well. Let's end this, old friend." The battle between Einar and myself was akin to the ancient dance of predator and prey, where each step, each move held life and death in balance. Einar, larger and stronger, wielded my sword with ferocity. Every strike was powerful, intended to end the fight quickly. Yet, for all his strength, Einar was not accustomed to the finesse and balance of a blade. I used this to my advantage, employing a strategy of evasion and deflection. Each time Einar lunged, I sidestepped, using his momentum against him. When he slashed, I parried, redirecting the force of his blow. The Timberfangs had by now entered the clearing, their eyes fixed intently on our duel, the anticipation palpable. Sweat dripped from our brows as the minutes stretched on. A particularly forceful strike from Einar almost caught me off guard, but I managed to duck at the last moment. Seizing the opening, I used my inferior sword to sweep at Einar's legs, knocking him off balance. With a deft maneuver, I managed to get onto his back and pin him down. The back of my blade at his throat, and his own weapon, my runic blade, just out of reach. Gasping for breath, Einar smirked up at me. "You know, Alistair," he rasped, "if I were to transform right now, you wouldn't stand a chance." I laughed. "Then you'd be admitting defeat in our man versus man," I countered. Is the proud leader of the Winterpelt willing to concede so easily? Einar's eyes glinted with a mixture of respect and frustration. "You have me," he admitted begrudgingly. "I want my sword back," I announced, releasing the pressure on Einar's throat. In one swift motion, I let go of the blade that pressed against his neck, stepped back, and reclaimed my own cherished runic sword from the snowy ground. The familiar heft of the weapon felt comforting in my grip, like an extension of my very being. Einar lay still for a brief moment, staring at the blade I had relinquished. The cold steel gleamed faintly in the dim light, drawing his attention as if it possessed its own kind of magic. Slowly, a smile began to tug at the corners of his lips. He grasped the sword's hilt, raising it and testing its weight with an appreciative nod. The battle may have seemed over, but the fire in Einar's eyes told a different story. "This isn't finished," he growled, lunging forward once more. But this time, with my trusty sword back in hand, our roles reversed. I danced around him, my sword a blur of silver and runes, deflecting and parrying his every move. It wasn't long before Einar found himself on the defensive, struggling to match my speed, precision, and power. With a final deft twist, I disarmed him, sending his blade to the ground. Panting heavily, Einar chuckled, raising his hands in a sign of surrender. All right, he conceded. "You win, Alistair." He made his way back to his clan, who were tensely awaiting his signal. Einar took a deep breath and shifted into his wolf form. He stood with his clan, a brief but important discussion happening before he released a resonant howl that echoed throughout the forest. To my surprise, instead of the expected retreat, the Winterpelt wolves surged forward. Harkin's Timberfangs, also momentarily shocked by the unexpected turn of events, quickly rallied, launching themselves into the fray. Harnessing the strength and agility coursing through his veins, Einar coiled his powerful legs beneath him. With a sudden explosive force, he sprang upwards, gracefully arching over my head. As he soared, every muscle in his body seemed primed for combat, his intent gaze locked towards Harkin, who stood in the distance, preparing for the impending attack. All around, The forest clearing became a whirlwind of snarling muzzles, flashing claws, and flying fur. The uneasy truce we had momentarily achieved had shattered, and once again, war consumed us all. Standing on the edge of the frenzied battlefield, my heart pounded heavily in my chest. Even with my trusty sword once again by my side, its familiar weight providing a semblance of comfort, I knew my limitations. My body still bore the aches and strains of recent events, and while the fight with Einar had reignited my spirit, it had drained much of my energy. I knew that, in my current state, facing a mature werewolf would be a foolish endeavor. An alpha, impossible. Yet, even in my weakened state, there was one thing I could still manage: observation. The toll on my body had diminished my ability to act, but my mind remained sharp. My eyes roamed the battlefield, drinking in every detail, every movement, every flicker of emotion. I looked out for the interloper, the vampire whose game the clans are now playing. A young Timberfang, with fiery reddish-brown fur, launched herself at a much larger battle-hardened Winterpelt wolf. She was clearly trying to prove herself, and for a moment her speed caught the Winterpelt off guard. They tumbled, a flurry of fur and snarls, but experience eventually won, and the young Timberfang was brutally knocked down, her fiery spirit extinguished. Not far from them, a pair of wolves, one from each clan, circled each other warily, their movements almost synchronized. It was like watching a deadly dance. Suddenly, the Winterpelt lunged, but the Timberfang deftly sidestepped, causing the attacker to crash into a tree. The Timberfang didn't wait, pouncing on the momentarily dazed opponent, biting down on the Winterpelt's neck to take him out of the battle. I also noticed a group of younger Winterpelts employing pack tactics against a lone Timberfang warrior. He was outnumbered, but not outskilled. With every dodge, turn, and snap, he managed to fend off one attacker after another. Yet, fatigue was catching up, and one misstep led to a Winterpelt successfully landing a vicious bite on his hind leg. He limped, but continued to fight, his indomitable spirit only breaking as the three pounce on his weakened stance from all sides. He took one out in the ordeal, but was felled by the remaining two. Then there was a massive Winterpelt, his fur grizzled with age, taking on two younger Timberfangs. Even in his advanced years, his prowess was evident. Each move he made was measured, and his vast experience was clear in the way he anticipated every attack. He wasn't fast, but he was wise. With a well-timed move, he managed to trip one of the Timberfangs, immediately going for the throat before turning to face the other with a deep-throated growl. But for every warrior who stood their ground, others were not as fortunate. Across the clearing, I witnessed the heart-wrenching sight of warriors from both sides collapsing, wounds grievous. Their bodies lay motionless, strewn across the battleground, a grim testament to the ferocity of the clash. In the midst of the tumultuous battleground, a specific skirmish drew my attention, demanding it in its intensity and ferocity. Einar and Harkin, both alpha wolves and the embodiment of their respective clans' pride and power, were locked in a fierce duel. Their forms, much larger and more experienced than the other wolves, made their battle all the more awe-inspiring. Einar, with his sleek, silver-white fur, was a flash of moonlight every time he lunged or dodged. His eyes, piercing blue, glinted with a lethal determination. Harkin, on the other hand, with his thick, dark coat that looked almost black under the forest shadow, was a stark contrast. His movements were grounded and methodical, the embodiment of controlled strength. His amber eyes shone with an unyielding resolve, From my vantage point, I glanced around the battlefield, its expanse covered with the silent aftermath of the fierce struggle. Bodies lay strewn, the ground stained with the essence of fallen warriors, a solemn testament to the price both clans had paid this day. Here and there, fleeting movements hinted at the occasional struggle for breath, but largely the scene was eerily still, save for the two dominant figures in the clearing. The two alphas were an embodiment of raw power and primal fury as they circled each other. Einar, his every muscle coiled, would make a rapid, darting move, each one a calculated attempt to exploit a perceived vulnerability in his opponent. Harkin, ever vigilant, responded with deft maneuvers, countering with a devastating swipe or a snap of his powerful jaws. The dance between them was both mesmerizing and chilling, a duel where speed and might intertwined, leaving the outcome shrouded in uncertainty. As this intricate dance of dominance played out, an unexpected sound caught my attention. A deep, rumbling growl reverberated, announcing the presence of another combatant. Through the maze of fallen bodies, I could discern a lone Winterpelt wolf, its eyes locked onto the battle. Without hesitation, it made its intent clear, charging with an intent so fierce, it sent a chill down my spine as it leaped through the air. The Timberfang Alpha, engrossed in his duel with Einar, was momentarily unaware of the impending assault. Yet, in the final moment, displaying a reflex born of countless battles, Harkin pivoted, meeting the charging wolf with a forceful thrust of his mighty paw. The would-be attacker met the earth with a thud, its ambitions quelled in an instant by the Alpha's decisive action. In that split-second distraction, Einar saw an opportunity. His snarl amplified as he lunged at Harkin from behind. I found myself screaming out a desperate warning, running towards them, but it was too late. Einar's jaws clamped down on Harkin's exposed neck, and with a deft roll, he pinned Harkin to the ground. Harkin's struggles ceased almost instantly. His eyes, once full of fire and passion, now closed. Einar, panting heavily, stood above his fallen adversary, a mixture of triumph and sorrow evident in his gaze. The forest, moments ago filled with the sounds of battle, fell into a deep, mournful silence. The clearing was thick with tension, the sense of blood and conflict lingering heavily in the air. Einar's face was a maelstrom of emotions, guilt, anger, and deep regret. A sudden movement caught the corner of my eye. At the very edge of the forest, the darkness seemed to consolidate, coiling and writhing as if alive. A distinct form emerged, elongating and stretching, racing across the clearing with a speed that seemed almost unnatural. It wasn't merely a shadow. It was as if the night itself had taken shape, a silhouette imbued with purpose and menace. With every inch it covered, the temperature around us seemed to drop. An eerie coldness crept into the atmosphere, chilling more than the snow ever could, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. By the time it reached us, the previously indistinct shape had morphed into something more tangible. The unmistakable figure of the vampire, foreboding, stood there. Its pale skin appeared almost luminescent against the dimming backdrop, reflecting the moonlight in a ghostly sheen. Its lips curled into a smirk, revealing those wickedly sharp teeth that glinted with malevolence. The sudden juxtaposition of the cold, dark being in the midst of a war-torn clearing only added to the thick, overwhelming tension that had settled around us. Despite my previous confrontations with him, the sheer audacity of the vampire's appearance here, amid the aftermath of such devastation, sent shivers down my spine. Einar, already weary and wounded, seemed to straighten at the new threat, a growl rumbling deep in his chest. "Ah, Alistair," the vampire crooned, its voice dripping with mockery. "It's touching to see you cared enough to stay to watch the slaughter. Look at what a little misunderstanding can cause," it says, its arms motioning to the battlefield, its smile widening to a sickening grin. "I hope you enjoyed my little show."